really about understanding how we can better use all of the communication that's happening to make better decisions and also to ask better questions. So obviously there's quite a lot that's involved in both facial decoding and also personology. So for the purposes of today's session, we're going to focus on the decoding at a high level and how you can start to pull that together. But it's been around for quite a long time. So a little bit about me, which Linda's already done, so I'm going to move straight past that because it's about what we're in here to do, which is really about understanding what is facial action coding. So facial action coding was originally identified by Dr. Ekman in the late 1960s, and he studied a tribe that actually hadn't really come into any human contact for many years. Or forever, so it didn't really understand, it hadn't been touched by the modern world, and he identified that actually there are 7 human emotions that are universally the same, irrelevant of our age, our race, our culture. And he went on to actually do tests on this over the next 40 plus years, including testing people that were born blind, and the same is true. So that's what we're going to go into today. Now, historically, it was believed that actually, when we think about the way we communicate, that research showed that only 7% of what we are saying is taken in by the words that we use. 38% of it is on the tone of voice, and 55% of it is in the body language. It's in what we're seeing at the time that we're having that conversation. Now, I would hugely caveat that with the fact that it really does depend on the situation, and that's true about everything I'm going to talk about today. Context is king. So for example, if you are lost and you want to get directions, you probably couldn't care less about my tone of voice or my body language. You want the actual words. You want to know, where am I going at the end of this street? Do I go left? Do I go right? What do I do? Whereas if we're talking about perhaps something that involves your family, then actually, because emotion is involved, you're going to start looking at all those other elements that come into play. And you quite simply can't not communicate. We are communicating all of the time. I often use the theme tune to Notting Hill, which is you say it best when you say nothing at all. And the reality is we all do. And the beauty of kind of what we're doing with face whispering is that actually our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. So by the time we think, don't show the emotion, it's too late. It's already out there for people to see. And you might go, well, that's all right for you to know, Kim, because you know how to do this. But for the rest of us, we don't know. But have you ever looked at a picture or been in a situation and gone, the lips and hips don't match? What you're saying and what I'm feeling don't marry up. And that's often because we will say things like, I'm fine. I say I'm fine all of the time. If I ever tell you I'm fine, I mean I'm fed up, insecure, neurotic and emotional. I either need a glass of wine, a cup of tea or a hug. But the one thing I'm definitely not is fine. But we have learned to use some of this language to keep ourselves safe from conversations we don't want to have. And when we think about that from a leadership point of view, particularly at the moment with the increasing challenges that we've got on mental health and anxiety for people in the workplace, if they're not telling us how they're really feeling, as leaders, how are we able to really support them? So for me, that was when I first found out about this, that was my driver, was to go and say, well, could I learn more about my people so that I can step in and help them? And the whole point of this is not to call people out on it. It's not, once you know to spot when somebody's angry or anxious, it's not to go, oh, wow, sorry, Linda, I'm going to pick on you, but wow, Linda, you look anxious today, because that's not going to help you. That's not going to make you feel included or comfortable. But what you can do is spot that somebody's anxious and go, before we leave, I want to know, what could I do as your leader to ensure that you are set up for success today? So you create a safe space for them to go, I'm not really sure how to do this. I use it in training all of the time. So if I see a sea of confused faces, I won't go, wow, you look confused, because that's, again, not going to help. But what I can do is say, I'm just going to pause, and before we move on to the next part of this, can I just check, is there any elements of this people would like me to unpack in a little bit more detail? So it's really just giving people that safe space to go, I'd love you to just run over that piece again for me, without them having to be the one that interrupts you to go, I don't understand what you're talking about, because maybe they feel like they might be the only person that's feeling that in the room. So today's piece is really going to be about those facial expressions, and it's quite detailed. So what I've tried to do is take it up a level so that you get something out of it that you can absolutely start to use straight away. Just bringing this to your attention allows your subconscious, which already knows this stuff, to start to link into it. So even after the very first time I met somebody at Adrienne Carter, who trained me to be a practitioner, first time I met her, and she went through a presentation similar, you start to spot this for yourself. And the one caveat I would give you is be really careful about not calling it out. You'll start to read it on the people that you see, on your partners, on your family. My little girl, bless her, has been decoded into next year. Every time she says something, I'm like, oh, you're saying that, but your expression tells mummy different. So it's just about making sure that you don't call people out on it, but ask questions to confirm that actually you're on the right lines. And it's a skill that you will really pick up, because, as I say, our subconscious already knows all about it. So there are 49 muscle movements in our face. And this is where we get into the detail, which, please know I'm not going to take you into, because this is like high level. But these are all of the muscle that we have in our face, and we move them in a combination of 49. And based on that combination, it's identified that universally, we will demonstrate the same 7 emotions by using the same combination of muscle movements in the same direction. Now, clearly, there's significantly more than 7 emotions, but there's only 7 that are universal. So all of the others, they would differ based on our race, our gender, our culture, but these 7, they've identified would be exactly the same. And as I say, even if you were born blind, so you've never seen anybody else pull them, you still pull these the same way. They did a massive amount of research into blind-born Olympians to be able to really see how this came out. And that's when they really understood, because they thought that might be one of the anomalies, but it turns out that no, we all do it. But the piece that's worth mentioning is these are micro expressions. So a micro expression can last 1/25th of a second. So it's fleeting but powerful. So if you know what to look for, and you can start to look at them, and we're going to work through a couple of examples, you start to see how subtle they are, but it makes you really start to pay attention. And clearly you don't face whisper all the time. Now, I work with lots of people and they're like, are you face whispering me now? Or you start finding people holding their face going, what's she looking at? What's she checking? And it's not around that, but it's an additional tool in your toolkit. If when you're saying the conversation's not quite going where I thought it was going, let me have a look to see what's going on. If we really want to lead with emotional intelligence, we want to be able to understand what emotions look like when we see them, so that we can respond better to them. And this is an amazing tool to do so. So we have up to 16,500 muscle movements every day. So if we think about how much communication that we're going, and as I say, even if we were born blind, these 7 are universal. So which best fits? Which of these pictures do you think is demonstrating a child that is happy? So I'm going to guess, quick show of hands, how many people think this one that I've got the cursor on right now is the happy person? Fabulous. Anybody think this person's the happy person? I'm going to go with no. How about this one? No. How about this one? No. So we can see happy quite easily. But it can become more complicated, because again here, it's like, would we say this person is happy? Quick show of hands. Yeah. They're actually, so whilst they're not unhappy, they're actually demonstrating surprise. Now, happy surprise, it's not a surprise that's gone badly for them, but actually they're demonstrating some surprise, whereas this little guy over here, he's just showing happiness. So nothing surprising has happened to him. He's just happy because of where he's going. So we can see how you start to layer on how the emotions, they can be demonstrating more than one at a time. So it's looking through those. And which one of these do we think is sad? So would we say this little guy down here is sad? And this guy here, whilst he looks a little bit sad, he's actually, because of this part of his forehead that's like raised, he's actually angry, as is this child here that we're just pointing at there. They're actually, I don't know if you can see the crinkle on their nose. Something disgusting is happening to that child. It's disgust. So maybe they need changing, or they want food and they've not got it. But the fact that, so when we first look at them, we might go, well, there's 3 of those on that there, Kim, that are sad. But once you understand the emotion, you can see that actually there's one that's really sad. There's one that's a bit fearful and a little bit annoyed. And there's one that's actually disgusted and upset. So something is going on. So even with just babies, you can start to actually determine potentially what's going wrong for them. So let's head in to emotions. So emotions really fit in 2 parts. So we have what's going on at the top of our face and what's going on at the bottom. When we're demonstrating these 7 emotions, both come into play. But what you do is you go into what's happening up here first, and then you check what's going on down here to quantify whether or not that person is likely to be showing a particular emotion. So as we go through these, you'll start to see that a lot of them have been cut into that, what's happening at the top of the face and what's going on at the bottom. So obviously, we see people as a full-on face. We don't see them with a big line across the middle, letting us know that we're looking top or bottom. But if we were to look at this particular picture, we can see that there's no line showing here. There's no wrinkle on his nose. So he's not anxious. He's not surprised. He's not showing any form of fear. At a quick look, you might think, well, he looks relatively happy. But in actual fact, if you see here, and you can see it much more defined when you see that it's split in 2 places, the smile only goes up on one side. This is actually an image of contempt. So we can, and if you saw how many people's LinkedIn profiles are actually demonstrating contempt, it would literally terrify you. And I'm sure that they don't know that they're demonstrating contempt, because if they did, they'd change the picture. But actually, we get a lot of this where people are just doing a half smile. It's actually a demonstration of contempt. Either they don't want to be doing what they're doing, or they don't want, or they think that they know more than the person that they're talking to. This is really useful when we think about recruiting people. If you're recruiting somebody for a job and they demonstrate contempt in the interview, you probably want to ask a few more questions around that, about what is it that clearly not you showing contempt, but dig under, you know, what is it that's appealing to them about the job? What is it that is making them want to come here, so that you can get them to uncover a little bit more about what's happening and why they're showing that emotion. But as I say, we don't call them out on it. So for contempt, what we do is we see that there's a lip corner is tightened and it's raised on only one side of the face. So Jack Nicholson in The Joker is a perfect example of the contempt. So when you see someone who's got that kind of lopsided Joker smile, it's likely that they might be demonstrating contempt. Again, what you've got to do first, though, is take a view of the person normally when they're demonstrating no emotions, because some people might just have a slightly more crooked smile. So, you know, it's not saying you can't have a slightly crooked smile, but even people with a crooked smile, both cheeks would go up if they were genuinely smiling. So really what we're looking for is this part, and actually seeing whether or not just one side really lifts. So here are some examples of people that are demonstrating contempt. So you've got Winona Ryder. Prince William here was talking about the press. And this one was that big ad campaign that was, would you take it, running like a girl. So she's demonstrating contempt for the fact that anybody would think she isn't as capable or as able as a male counterpart. So it was the perfect image for that ad campaign. But if you were to look at Amazon, for example, they've got a half smile as their new brand image. I'm sure they don't realize that it demonstrates contempt. And yet a lot of people's opinion is that Amazon is contemptuous of its customers. So it's interesting how inadvertently we can do it. And here on this quick video, you can see how fleeting it is, but where she's demonstrating that it just, let's do it with my pointer, it's only lifting on one side. So they can be really quick. So we're going to head into another emotion. So I'm just going to get the chat up. What emotion do people think this person is demonstrating? Irritation? Okay, now if I put the bottom of the face, anything else? Confusion or irritation, anger, fabulous. And then when we pull the whole face together, you're right, it is anger, but that can also cover things like being spiteful, being irritated, being aggressive, hostile, angry, annoyed. So within these typed emotions, actually, there's a number of sub-emotions that we can feel. So we're not just, so anger is the overarching one, but it can be all of these that come into play. So again, you wouldn't call this person out on it, but you can see that they're upset about something. You would actually want to start to ask some questions to understand what's going on and how you might be able to help them. If this is happening in the workplace, you know, what is it that's going on in the context, and how can you help them to feel more supported, more engaged? So anger, when we look at it, we can define it by 3 muscle movements. So the first part is here, we see the eyebrows go down and they come inwards. It's almost like our face closes up on ourselves. The eyes tend to glare, so we become fixated on whatever it is that's frustrating us, whether that's something we can physically see or whether or not it's just internally we're fixated and therefore our eyes glaze over a little bit. And there's a narrowing of the lips. It's almost like our entire face wants to hold it in because we're trying to control that emotion. And again, as I say, it can be really, really fleeting. So here are some examples of people that are angry, either very overtly angry, like this lady, or subtly angry, like the Queen. But we can spot in those moments where those pictures were taken that there was some anger, some frustration, some irritation that was going on. So again, we would dig into what was happening in the wider context, and then what questions does that give us to be able to better understand the person? Because at our basic, people want to be listened to, understood, and respected. And that doesn't mean to say we can't ever disagree, but it's about never disrespecting. So this is really about trying to better understand the other person and where they're coming from. So here is the top half of what anger looks like on the face. So you can see from here that those eyebrows really knit in and the face kind of closes and the eyes lose focus. So that real control. Just check in chat that everyone's fine. It's great, Nita. You do look at yourself. When we were doing this as training, and I feel like the most vain woman in the world, which if anybody knew me would know not true. We had to have a mirror at the side of our desk, and I still have it because I do this with clients all the time. One of the things to do around these is to really start to practice them on yourself and look at them in the mirror. The more you do them, the more you're better able to spot them. And it also, when you start thinking about, right, I'm angry, and you kind of, so thinking about a time when you have been angry and then looking at how that shows up on your face, you'll start to see these for yourself. And that helps them to become much easier for you to spot them in others. Right, so here, what emotion, again in the chat, do we think is going on here? Worried? Scared, yeah. Worry? Absolutely. So we can see in the way that the face is being held, she's kind of almost trying to take her features back. But some of this is actually sadness. So here, where you can see the way that the eyebrows are kind of drooped down and the eyes are looking more fearful. Down here at the bottom, the mouth's very much held. So it's rejected, it's sad, it's hopeless, they're worried, they're disappointed, they're hesitant at this point. So when we look at sadness, there is that drooping of the upper eyelids, so here. And then there's lack of focus. So if we think back to that anger, there was a lot of focus. Here, there's almost a distancing. There's a melancholy that's there. And there's a slight pulling down of the lips, and it's very slight, but that kind of really does depend on the depth of the sadness. Obviously, if somebody is really grief-stricken, you will see the pulling down of those lips much more defined than you would if somebody's just a little bit sad about something. But you generally see this combination of features when somebody is sad or grieving. And here, here are some examples. So it can be really slight. The reason I've got these two here is this is her normal face. This is her sad face. There's not a massive amount of difference, but if you look here, how bright her eyes normally are, and that there's a slightly more neutral line, it tips up ever so slightly even when resting. But here, where it's demonstrating sadness, the eyes have drooped down, there's a lack of focus, and there's a turning down of the mouth. Obviously here with Barack Obama, it's much more defined, and this lady is clearly very sad. I'm not going to show this video, but I happily will share it with anybody if you want to, just because it's extremely powerful and I wouldn't want to upset anybody. But this is actually taken the day before this gentleman killed himself, and the belief was you couldn't see it. But even without showing you the video, if you look here, he was clearly demonstrating real sadness, real grief. And throughout the, sorry, because I don't want to show that video. Throughout that entire video, it's the night before, and it's in a family piece, and he's trying to demonstrate that he's happy. Really, it is a very powerful movie, and I will happily share it with anybody who wants to look at it to see how the emotion plays out. But it feels a little heavy for a Thursday evening, so I'm gonna not. So here is kind of what sadness looks like, and again, see how it's what's happening on both sides of the face. So there is a knitting in of the eyes, there is a drooping here of the upper eyelid, and there is a downturning of the lips. And you can see that that often results also in the chin kind of raising up. I'm just going to pause because there's a few people in the chat. Absolutely, I will happily, I will share the whole presentation so that people have got it, and the links are in there so that you guys can use it then. But as I say, I'd just like to get people to only watch it if they want to, and under that caution that it is really sad to watch. But the reason that we have it in here is, imagine if people had been able to spot those emotions where they thought that that person, there was no sign that they were in such a sad place. There was actually quite a few signs, but people didn't know how to look for them. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we're trying to raise more awareness of this, is you could do some real good for somebody. So again, back in the chat, what do people think is the emotion that's being demonstrated here? Just quickly. Surprise. Surprise, yeah. And if I bring the bottom in, shock, panic, fear. Right, it's fear. So, and it can also be a number of other, as I say, sub-bits that sit underneath it. It can be that they're shy, that they're nervous, that they're panicky, that they're scared, that they're helpless. So fear isn't always because something is really horrendous. It's about putting us in a situation that we don't want to be in. So, you know, I demonstrate fear all the time if I have to stand up and do public speaking. But you kind of move past it. It's kind of pulling those parts in. And again, it's looking at that in the context piece. If you see this with people that you're leading or people in your organization, it may be that they're fearful that they're going to get it wrong, that they don't want to speak out publicly in a board meeting. So or any meeting of that kind. So actually it's about finding safe ways to create a place where they can actually feel comfortable to be able to step in and be less fearful, so that they know it's a safe space, so that you can actually help them to get over that nervousness if they are feeling a little bit shy. And you see that, again, we don't call them out on it, but we can have different conversations when we're having our one-to-one to talk about how we can pull those parts in and make that safe space for them. So fear, what we see is the eyebrows again are raised and pulled together. We see a raising here of the upper eyelids, but we also see a tension of the lower eyelids, and the lips are stretched slightly back towards the ears. So often, particularly if you've got somebody like me who hates the camera, you will see fear in photographs. There's a photograph somebody took of me, and actually everybody was like, oh, it's a lovely picture, you look really happy. But if you look really closely, I'm demonstrating all of these. And it was actually the day before something really, I was going to court about something. So I was genuinely fearful. And the person had just told me they were going to make me go live on Facebook. So I certainly was not happy and was demonstrating fear. But again, it's about how well we mask it. Most of the time, I mask things by wearing bright red dresses, bright red lipstick, and people therefore think that you're not fearful. But if you're looking for it, you can spot that fear and therefore help people out that are trying to hide it. So here we can see a number of different examples of people that are showing fear in that moment. Now, what that fear might be, it could be of being found out, it could be that they're in a horror movie, it's really scary. It could be that they're uncomfortable with what it is that they're about to say. But we see fear show up in a number of situations. And again, here, if we were just to look at the top, it's that raising up of the eyebrows and the restricting in. So again, back in the chat box, what emotion do we think we're showing now? Shock. And I'll put the bottom half in. Often when we see the bottom half, it can really help us. Surprise. Yeah. And when we see it as we would normally see it, you get the whole face, you get a much better picture. It is surprise. So it can be bewildered, perplexed, shocked, astonished, surprised, amazed. Being surprised doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a bad surprise. So again, this is why I say you sometimes will see more than one emotion layered together. If somebody is surprised and fearful, you'll see that combination and they'll come very quickly. If someone's surprised, but it's a happy surprise, so for example, I'll use my little girl, if I turn up early to nursery, she's surprised because that never happens, but she's normally happily surprised. So you get that quick 1-2 from surprise immediately into happiness. Again, sometimes you can see that surprise immediately go into fear. Surprise will usually come before the next emotion because it was the shock of what happened, and then the next thing we'll do is we'll feel the emotion around what that surprise has driven for us. So in surprise, what we're seeing again is that the eyebrows are raised, but here we see that the eyes widen. So we basically like try and get more information in. We don't know what's going on, so we want to gather as much as possible. So the eyes open up, they widen out so that we can bring in more information and help us define, is it a good surprise or a bad surprise? And again, whether it's a good surprise or a bad surprise, we see the mouth open. So that can open really wide if it's a real wow surprise, or it can open less wide and more dropping down if it's a fearful surprise, something that we didn't want to have happen. So let's look here again at a number of them. So you can see here Barack Obama, his eyes have really widened out so he can gather more in. The bottom lip's really dropped down. You can see the surprise really pulling up on his face. Same here. I mean, here it looks like she's probably just been told something really juicy gossip that she's surprised about. But again, you see that widening of the eyes, the dropping of the mouth. Here, although obviously the mouth's being held tight, again, you can see the widening of the eyes, and you can see the clenching here just internally on the cheeks, which is somebody controlling the mouth, not dropping. And you'll see that often when people are demonstrating surprise but trying not to look surprised. You won't actually see the mouth open, but if you look at this part of their face, you'll see internally that jaw opening moment. They're just not letting it happen. So kind of that clenching in. And the same here, although I would suggest his shock is probably not such a positive one, as you can see by the way he's got the widening eyes, he's got the dropped piece here, but he's starting to demonstrate some of that raising of anxiety. So again, here's how you can see it all raises up, the eyes widen out, we're gathering in as much information as we possibly can to enable us to understand and determine what's the next emotion that we're going to look into. So here, quickly again in the chat, what emotion do we think that this person is demonstrating? Confusion, puzzled, perplexed, frustration. And how about if I put the bottom half in? Consternation. Disgust. Yeah, this person is disgusted. So they're unreceptive, disagreeable, disgusted, revolted, distrustful, or envious. It can be a whole range of the sub-emotions that sit around it. But whenever something disgusts us, we wrinkle this part of our nose. And sometimes, again, we can demonstrate two emotions at the same time. So my little girl, for example, she loves to be tickled, but on some level she finds it disgusting, because despite the fact she's giggling away and she's happy as Larry, this part of her nose wrinkles up. And that's probably true of tickling, because sometimes, although it makes you laugh, you just want the person to stop because it's horrible. But we'll sometimes see those two. It's the closest emotion that we demonstrate to telling a lie. So there isn't actually a universal emotion for telling a lie, but people are most likely to demonstrate disgust just before or just after telling a lie. And that's because we've been told and brought up and taught that lying is wrong. So there is that moral element where we're about to do something that we know is not right. And we kind of will very quickly, briefly show that disgust and then move on. You see it a lot in celebrity interviews. It's one of the things where they get people like me to come in afterwards and dissect what was happening, what emotions were being shown, to help understand how likely was it that the person really understood what was going on. One of the things that we did was the Prince Harry and Meghan interview, so a decoding of that to say, you know, what emotions were being shown at various points to see whether or not they did or did not match the words that were being said, to get a more rounded understanding of exactly what was going on in the time for those people, which really changes the dynamic of the conversation. So when we think about disgust, we see, and this one is the killer. You can't be disgusted without wrinkling this piece, but you can't be anything but disgusted without wrinkling this piece. It's the only way that that muscle moves is if we think about something that disgusts us in some way. And again, the upper lip this time is raised slightly. So we're kind of like scrunching our face in because it's just not very nice. We don't like it. So here are some varying levels of disgust. And sometimes that disgust can be, disgust, I've stepped in something awful, or somebody's showing me something that's not very nice, or actually I'm just disgusted in the way that you're behaving. So we can see that coming out in a variety, but across all of them, look, the actual giveaway, and here she's really wrinkling it for us, which is nice, but it is that wrinkle here of the nose, which is that disgust piece. It's a great one to look out for when we're thinking about our people, because it really helps us understand that something is not going off that they like. So maybe they don't like the way the conversation's going, but again, context is king. We want to really dig underneath and ask better questions to understand what's going on. So see here again, it's that pulling in, it's the real wrinkling of this part of the face to let you know that actually that's not going the way the person wants it to. So here, what emotion do we think Hillary Clinton's showing? Happiness, joy, happiness. Yeah. And when we bring the bottom in, that really brings it to life for us. So again, you can see here, like there's the bulge here, the mouth is wide and upturned. She's happy, or she could be demonstrating that she's proud, hopeful, happy, content, relaxed, and obliging. So one of the things that we see when we're looking at happiness is the bulge here. If you think about when you smile, when you're really happy, you can't help but have a bulge around here because your cheeks come up and take over that space. It's one of the biggest challenges when we look at brands and how they use pictures. Because we're in a world now that wants perfection, very often people, when they're doing those brand images, they'll airbrush this part out because they don't want it to look like the model that they're using is anything but perfect. But actually, when you do that, we are predisposed to realize that it's not a real smile. We look for these parts. So we did some work with a big beauty brand and went to do some market research, and they had didn't do this test. It was actually on mouthwash. So the mouthwash was exactly the same, and they had two pictures of exactly the same lady, one of whom had been airbrushed out, so it was a more posed smile, and one of them was her naturally smiling. Other than that, the pictures were identical, as were the samples. And they left them there for the day. Midway through, they were swapping them to make sure there was no left-right bias. They topped them up the second somebody took one away so that there was nothing around the kind of volumes that were in there. But 75% of the samples that were taken, all of them were free, were taken from the picture of the genuinely happy smile. And that's because, as I say, our subconscious knows about these things, but we've just not given them a label. So we don't know how to go with our gut. Our subconscious, or our ability to read faces, is actually trusting in our gut. But learning about this allows us to put a label to them and then start to ask some context to pull that around. So what's going on in happiness? We see the wrinkle here of the crow's feet, the pushed up cheeks, which gives us the bulge under the eye, and the movement from the muscle here that orbits the eye. So again, when we see here, look, you can see that bulge that's coming up as she's genuinely happy. So when we're looking at smiles, there's a number of them, but these are both still people that are trying to pull a full smile, bless you. These are both genuine smiles, but you can see here in this top one, she's really happy about it. She's really given in to that smile. She's got the real bulge up here, and the smile makes it all the way to her eyes. You can see that actually her eyes are really lit up with what's going on. Whereas down here, this is more of a polite smile. So it's still genuine. You can still see that there are bulges, but the lips are less lifted up. It's less of that generous U shape, and there's fewer creases around the eye. So she's being polite and smiling, but she's possibly not amazingly happy with what's happening. She's also not unhappy with it. So she's just being polite. And we see a lot of this when we think about people in our business smiling at our customers, we see a lot of this polite smiling versus that genuine smile. So that's kind of the end of the presentation piece, because what I wanted to do was be able to open it up a little bit more to answer any questions and see what people have thought so far. Clearly, we've kind of really just touched on those emotions. We can go back over any of them. To really learn them, we have to go into more detail, but this is just the first part of what you can do in a face whispering point of view. So we're going through today those emotions, how we pull them together, how do we look for the different elements of the face. But they, of course, sorry Linda, you have only got a few minutes because I was the one that was late in, so we've only got 5 minutes, ladies. But I'll answer as many questions as I can, and obviously please do get in touch if you'd like to know more, because as well as the facial action decoding, which we touched on today, there's also personology. And personology is where there's 37 different features on our face, and based on those, we can actually determine people's main characteristics.